So how does it happen? How does one of the world's major economies just stop growing? We're going to dig into the UK's story, a 15-year saga of near-zero growth that's left families poorer and the entire country asking, what went wrong? Okay, so picture this. Late 2023, this bombshell announcement drops from the UK's second biggest city. It was basically a distress signal, and it perfectly summed up the trouble the whole country was in. Think of it as the first visible symptom of a much, much bigger problem. I mean, how can a city that big go bankrupt? It sounds crazy, right? But digging into that question actually takes us right to the heart of this whole mess. It's a story that's been playing out for more than a decade, and it really boils down to two huge, self-inflicted economic wounds. All right, so let's start right there with that big, flashing warning sign, the city of Birmingham. This was once a giant of industry, a real powerhouse. And now, it had to officially declare that it was in deep, deep financial trouble. Basically, it admitted it could no longer pay its bills. This notice is like the emergency brake, the nuclear option for a city council. It means they stop all non-essential spending instantly. So things like libraries, parks, community centers, they're all on the chopping block. The question is, what on earth could push a city of over 1 million people right to the edge like this? Well, it turns out it wasn't just one thing. It was a perfect storm, really. You had these huge, sudden hits, a massive lawsuit, and a wildly over-budget IT project. Those were the knockout punches. But here's the thing. The city was already on the ropes. For years, funding from the central government had been squeezed and squeezed. There was just no cushion left, no safety net to absorb the blows. And this is absolutely key. This isn't just a Birmingham story. You can't just blame it on local mismanagement. No, this is happening all over the country. We're talking London suburbs, old industrial towns. Councils everywhere are right on the brink. They've been starved of cash, and in the UK system, they have very few ways to raise money themselves. So this crisis with city councils, it didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's a direct symptom of a much, much bigger national problem, an economic failure that's become widely known as the UK's lost decade. For the last 15 years, it's like the UK's economic engine has just been sputtering. After the 2008 financial crisis, most other developed countries got back on their feet and started growing again. But the UK, it basically just flatlined. And when you look at the numbers, you can really see how much it's fallen behind everyone else. Okay, first up, productivity. This is super important. It's basically how much bang you get for your buck, how much value you create for every hour worked. It's the engine of economic growth. And since 2008, the UK's has been crawling along at just 0.4% a year. That's less than half the average of similar countries. It's so bad, economists literally call it the productivity puzzle. And that productivity puzzle, it hits you right in your wallet. See, when productivity doesn't grow, wages don't grow. It's that simple. Real wages in the UK have basically gone nowhere. In fact, for many, they've gone backwards. Now compare that to Germany, where the middle class got a 20% pay rise in real terms, or France, where it was 10%. This isn't some abstract number. It's cost the average worker in the UK thousands of pounds every single year. So why is productivity so weak? What's the root cause? Well, it all comes down to one word: investment. Or really, a lack of it. Get this, out of 30 developed nations that report this data, the UK ranks a shocking 27th for business investment. 27th. The country just isn't putting money into new technologies, new factories, new skills. It's not investing in its own future. Okay, so how did we get here? How does a major economy end up at the bottom of the investment league tables? To understand that, we have to rewind the clock. We need to look at the first of two massive and very controversial decisions that really set the UK on this course. All right, so cast your mind back to the 2008 financial crisis. The world is reeling. Countries like the US decided to spend their way out of trouble, pumping money into the economy. The UK's new government, they went in the complete opposite direction. They were terrified of a debt crisis like the one they saw happening in Greece, so they slammed on the brakes. They chose a path of deep, painful cuts to public spending, a policy that became known as austerity. And what that did was starve the country of public investment. You can see the results everywhere today: schools that are falling apart, creaky transport networks, a struggling health service. And, crucially, it included those huge cuts to local city councils, which brings us right back to Birmingham. The big gamble to slash the national debt ended up cracking the very foundations of the economy. So the country is already dealing with the long-term damage from austerity. And then a second shock hits, a massive political and economic earthquake that would pour gasoline on the fire of low investment. Yep, we're talking about Brexit. The 2016 vote to leave the European Union wasn't just a political bombshell. It unleashed years of total economic uncertainty. And if there's one thing businesses hate, the one thing that stops them from investing, it's uncertainty. And that's precisely what happened. I mean, put yourself in a CEO's shoes. Would you spend millions building a new factory in the UK when you have literally no idea what the rules for selling to your biggest customer, the EU, are going to be next year? Of course not. So for about 5 years, while the politicians argued, business investment just ground to a halt. The big slogan was, "Take back control," right? That was the promise. But the reality of doing these new trade deals was complicated. It often meant giving up some control just to get access to markets. A perfect example is the fishing industry. It was a huge symbol for the Leave campaign. But to make it easier for them to sell fish to the EU, the UK government had to agree to let EU boats keep fishing in UK waters under old quotas for more than 10 years. And now we're starting to see the economic fallout in the data. Official forecasts are pointing to a long-term 4% hit to productivity and a 15% drop in trade. Small businesses have been slammed. Their exports to the EU are down by about a third. One analysis even calculated that by 2022, the UK economy was already £29 billion smaller than it would have been if it had remained. Okay, so let's bring this all together. What does a lost decade of austerity and Brexit actually mean for regular people right now? Well, it means you have an economy that's less productive, has had less investment, and is way more fragile. So when global shocks come along, it gets hit harder. And that's exactly what led to the severe, long-lasting cost of living crisis. Now look, inflation was a problem everywhere after the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. But in the UK, it was higher, and it stuck around for longer. And it was hitting the absolute essentials. The price of food, services, and especially rent, which just went through the roof. This put a massive squeeze on families who, remember, hadn't had a real pay rise in over a decade. And that right there is the result of this whole story. It's the cumulative effect. You add up the weak investment, the stagnant productivity, and all the political chaos. And what do you get? You get a country where the average family is demonstrably poorer, and the nation as a whole is just less resilient, less ready to face the next global challenge. So you go from a major city declaring bankruptcy, all the way back through 15 years of economic pain, and you realize this is a huge cautionary tale. It shows just how much political choices matter and how long their consequences can last. The really big question for the UK now is, can it find a new way forward? Can it actually rebuild those economic foundations and start growing again?